And now this morning, I have the pleasure to introduce Liz Harrington, Assistant Director, Data Analysis at EdPlus. Liz is speaking today on reporting about online students with ease. Please help me welcome Liz.
Hey everyone, thank you for that introduction. I will go ahead and share my screen and get started. Okay, can everyone see my screen all right? Great. Okay, so we're talking about a table in the ASU DW schema, the data warehouse. The table is EP student enroll steps. So today's agenda, I'm going to introduce the table a little bit and define what it is, discuss some basics around session level reporting, go through the individual fields within the table, and briefly touch on just two commonly joined tables. And just to give you a heads up, I don't anticipate this taking the full allotted time. So if you have questions, we definitely have time to answer them, so don't be shy. Okay, so the table is ASU DW EP Student Enroll Test. And essentially, it's an enriched session level version of the PS Student Enroll table, and it was developed by our data analysis team at EdPlus probably a few years ago now, and there have been a few incremental updates to it then, but it was primarily developed by Josh Johnson and Emily Ice. Josh has since moved on to UTO, but Emily is still on my team. This may be hard to ask because we are in Zoom world, but has anybody used this table? Okay, I don't see anything. So
yeah, I don't think I have. We've used a lot of tables, but I don't think I've used that one.
We have, Chuck says yes, that he has, so we have one yes.
Right on, thanks Chuck. Okay, so hopefully even Chuck learned something new about the table today, but for folks who haven't used it yet, hopefully you learned something new. The table only contains online campus students. So I didn't note that explicitly because as someone who works for EdPlus and primarily reports on online students, it's not something that I'm always conscious of, but I do want to be clear, this table only contains online campus students. So some benefits of using EP Student Enroll Test for reporting enrollment for online students versus using PS Student Enroll would be the ability to report enrollment and SCH by session. It is a session level table, and I'll go into that a bit more in the next slide. Because we report by session, we also need to handle dynamic session courses by recoding those dynamic sessions into either A, B, or C, so that we know how to categorize those enrollments as either an A session enrollment or a B session enrollment. The other major benefit of using this table is that there are dozens of convenience fields. Some examples of those is an orientation flag, so you can exclude orientation only enrollments. We have a cleaned up grade field, so the course grade off field, if you're familiar with PS Student Enroll, includes plus and minus grades, which can be a little tricky for reporting. So we've got cleaned up grade fields, or we just call it a basic grade field, and a bunch of enroll and drop flags based on a particular point in time. And again, we'll get into all of those fields.
We do have a question.
Okay.
Where do we access this report?
So it's not a report, it's a table.
Okay.
And it's in the ASU DW schema of the data warehouse.
Thank you.
Okay, so the crux of this table is that it is a session level table instead of term level. So when I say session, I mean A or B session instead of the full length term. So for example, in fall, we have fall A and we have fall B. The full term would just be fall. I hope that makes sense. The enroll term ses code, that is our session code field. Again, we'll get into the particular fields in the table in the next slide, but we have some examples of the term ses codes, and I put a short note just about how that field is constructed. So if you're not familiar with term session, it's just a concatenation of the S term, a recoded class session, which I define below, and the letter C. So the recoded class session, the value there can be either A or B. And this means that we have to deal with C session enrollments and dynamic session enrollments and recode them into A or B. In this table for C session enrollments, they're included in both A and B. And the reason we do that over at EdPlus is for operational purposes. So if a student is enrolled in a C session course, then they require coaching, they require support in both the A time period and the B time period. So we duplicate enrollment in both A and B. The problem with duplicating enrollment is that when you sum up A plus B, you no longer have a true reflection of how many unique students were actually enrolled in that time frame. So we do include essentially a dupe flag, so that if you want to look at the term level or roll up to the term level, you can remove the records that are duplicated in both A and B. For dynamic session courses, this is where the recoding of the class session becomes most important. So this is where we recoded DYN session course into either A or B, and that's based on the class start and end dates. So sometimes a dynamic session course may be essentially a C session course, in which case it would be duplicated in both the A time period and the B time period. Sometimes based on the dates, it falls more into A, sometimes it falls more into B. Are there any questions about the session?
We do have another question.
Okay.
I'm still a relative newcomer to the ASU data environment. Is this table in ASU PMPRD or ASU DWPRD?
It's in PMPROD, ASU PMPRD.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. I guess before I move on, I am curious, does anyone else here report by session, or is it typically just for the full term?
We've got a couple people answering. I sometimes report by session, both. Another person said we use both, typically by term. I report by session whenever possible. Both. We are just starting to do some session reporting, but has typically been by term. And another answer was typically full term, but very interested in this. And Elizabeth says full term default with session filters.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the feedback. based on kind of what I hear from other departments, it seems like session level reporting is kind of up and coming. It's something that people are becoming a little bit more interested in. Okay, so these are the actual tables. I'm sorry, these are the fields within the table. I hope that you can read these. Try to blow it up as much as possible. And I'm just going to start walking through the fields, if that's okay. I'm going to primarily focus on the fields with the arrows. And, but if you have questions about fields that I haven't highlighted, definitely feel free to ask. This is really the bulk of the presentation here. I believe I only have 1 or 2 more slides, so I'm going to take my time with this. So the first field is the enrolled term sess code, which we walked through on the previous slide. So this captures which enrollment session a particular enrollment record was is being captured in. I think I said that in the most roundabout way possible, but to for folks who aren't familiar with the PS student enrollment table, we'll touch on the granularity of the table. So there is 1 record per student per, in this case, session per registration. So if a student registers for a class, they get a record in the PS student enroll table, and in this table, the EP student enroll sess table, because it does, it is built off of the PS student enroll table. So in this case, if a student enrolls in a C session class, they'll get 2 records in the EP table because they're captured in both the A time period and the B time period. If a student registers for 5 classes for a session, they'll have 5 records. I hope that makes sense. So the EMPL ID field, ACAD career, class number fields, those are very standard. They're taken directly from PS student enroll. There's been no manipulation or calculations done based off of those fields. The enroll underscore S term field is essentially just the S term field from PS student enroll. So that would be the term code associated with this particular enrollment. So if you're joining this field to a term level table, you would join on the S term field. So for example, student profile is another term level table. So you would join on EMPL ID and S term, potentially ACAD career, depending on your use case. The enroll sess raw field, that's the session code associated with the course that the student registered in that has not been manipulated at all. So if the student is enrolled in a dynamic session course, which is DYN, the enroll sess raw field would be DYN. The next 3 fields, RAN S term, RAN sess, RAN S term sess code. These are all calculations based off of the term and session dates. So again, this is particularly important for dynamic session courses where if the raw session code is DYN, essentially what this field does is say, okay, well, based on the dates that course ran, what was the S term for that time period? So there's basically, for the most part, it matches what the actual term and session are in PS student enroll, but there are fringe cases which we're dealing with here. For example, courses that run over a winter intersession. Those need to be recoded into either fall or spring because we no longer really offer a winter intersession. So there's definitely a lot of handling of fringe cases. So I don't want to get too lost in the details there, but a lot of times those records are essentially thrown out of enrollment reporting just because they're not clean and they don't fall into timeframes leadership is often looking for. And what this does is really cleans up those records so that we can have more complete and consistent reporting. So I wouldn't use the ran S-term ran session, ran S-term sess code on their own typically. I would just use the enroll term sess code and gather the session details from there. The C in AC flag is that dupe flag that I mentioned earlier. So this will return a Y value or true value if you're looking at a C session course enrollment in the AC time period. So within the enroll term sess code, go back some examples of that field. So we've got 2207 AC, which is fall 2020 A session. So this flag here, C and AC will be true for that course in the AC time period. And then in the BC time period, it would be false, so it would be N. And essentially what this does is it removes duplication so that that C session enrollment is really only captured in one time period. So if you are using this table to report at the term level and not the session level, you would definitely want to make sure that you are applying this flag where C and AC equals no, so that you're only including unique records and not duplicating records across A and B time periods. Okay, moving on through the next fields. Location is just a class location. No manipulation done there. Course ID, course topic ID, topic and title. Those are just fields essentially grabbed from PS ASU A class. So kind of convenience fields are included in this table. I'm not sure if PS student enroll also includes these fields. I don't believe so, but it's very easy to join in. Oops. Okay. Is online orientation flag. So we have several non-credit orientation courses for ASU online students, for example, ASU 10, 11, 42. And oftentimes we want to exclude those orientation only students from our enrollment counts. So it can slightly inflate numbers if we include the orientation only students, so students whose only registration, only enrollment is orientation. We exclude those from our reporting for the most part, unless we're looking particularly at orientation, then we would really filter it only to orientation students. Is 101 orientation flag, so that's kind of a point of contention on our team when we developed this table. Some folks thought it might be worthwhile to indicate ASU 101 enrollments in a similar way as the online orientation courses. I feel pretty strongly that ASU 101 should be handled as a regular course and not as an orientation course, so I wouldn't recommend applying that filter in the same way we apply the online orientation. Okay, we'll touch on these two briefly. The student enroll status reason. Those are taken directly from PS student enroll, and those are pretty crucial fields in any basic enrollment reporting. If you're looking for enrolled students, you're going to either apply a filter based on student enroll status or enroll status reason. And we have some additional convenience filters in this table where you may not actually use this field, the student enroll status or enroll status reason. But if you're just getting started in enrollment reporting and you aren't familiar with the PS student enroll table, these two fields are really going to be your best friend in being able to display whether or not a student is still currently enrolled beyond the add drop period, if they've withdrawn, etc. Okay, we've got the enroll and drop dates, and then the last enroll and drop dates. The significance of the last enroll add date and last enroll drop dates, I didn't note it as a field to talk about, but I do think it's pretty crucial as far as enrollment reporting. I always use the last enroll add date and last enroll drop dates. I never use just the enroll add date and just the enroll drop date. There could be an oversight that I'm not aware of, but I have been reporting on enrollment for 4 or so years, and I have found that this is the most reliable way to do so. So the difference between the last enroll and the regular enroll date is that when an activity actually happens, like a student drops a course, the last enroll date or the last date captures when that activity actually happened with more precision than the regular enroll date, because the regular enroll date can be backdated manually. So using the last date better captures when this activity happened, so when the student actually dropped the course, whereas the enroll drop date reflects when the record was backdated, or the date that the record was backdated to. So if I want to know for reporting purposes who was enrolled by the tuition reimbursement deadline, I've got a choice there. Where do I want to know, okay, based on their backdated date or based on the date that the drop actually occurred? So typically for my use case, I always use the last date. If other folks don't use the last date, I would be definitely interested in hearing why and maybe informing my decisions moving forward.
We do have a question that came in through the chat.
Okay.
Where is the data source for last enrolled drop?
It's PS student enroll.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next field, so course grade off, again, is also straight from PS student enroll, which is the official grade awarded to the student. The additional field included on this table is the basic grade, which would just essentially adjust an A- grade to an A or a B+ grade to a B. Okay, so we have several fields that distinguish either SES or class. So the grade points by session or grade points by class. Down here below, units taken by session, units taken by class. So this is definitely unique to this table, and it's due to the session level granularity of the table. So looking particularly at units taken by session would split effectively C session course units in half. So because C session courses are duplicated in this table in the A session and B session, it splits the SCH or the units associated with that course evenly across session A and session B. And what that does is it allows you to perform aggregations that wouldn't return essentially erroneous results or results that include duplicates. So if you're interested in how many units are actually associated with that class, you would use the units taken class, which is not manipulated. It's just the SCH associated with that class. So if this is a C session enrollment and it's duplicated across A and across B, this value would still be, for example, 3 is a very common, most courses are worth 3 credits. So this value would still be 3. It would be 3 in the A time period and 3 in the B time period. Again, this becomes problematic if you're showing a calculation such as total SCH by term. And primarily, I see this from like dashboard users, folks who are using a dashboard and they don't realize that they're, by adding session A plus session B, that they're not getting a true result of how many SCH essentially were taken in that term period, because there's duplication where you wouldn't actually want to add A plus B. That would essentially overshoot the total for the term. So in that case, you would really want to use the units taken session. Okay. Passing grade is just a flag where if it's a C or greater, if the student received a grade of C or greater, or for graduate students, B or greater. This final pane, I think, provides some of the most useful functionality in this table. So the first 3 fields here, days since Reg open, is just a calculation based off of how many days have passed since registration for this particular session has been open. Days registered before class start, days registered before session start. So I think it's fairly explanatory here just in the title. This is actually something that was extremely useful just yesterday. Because of the COVID situation, our enrollment is following a different pattern than in previous years. So there were questions about how soon do students typically register for a session. And having this field already calculated just made it even quicker to answer that question. The distinction between days registered before class start and before session start. So class start is based off of the particular start date of the class for this enrollment record, which typically aligns very closely with the session start. But again, it's those fringe cases, the dynamic courses primarily, that would be different between class start date and session start date. 2 more days calculations, which is how many days have passed between a student who drops, if they do drop, and the start of the class, or students who drop after the session start. This next large chunk of fields, they're all enrollment indicators at various points in time throughout the course. I think one of my first lessons as an analyst at EdPlus, I was working under Josh Johnson, and somebody asked me for an enrollment report, and he said, like, what kind of enrollment are they asking for? Like, I don't know, they just said enrollment. So hopefully I can pass on that lesson to you guys. Do they want add drop enrollment? Do they want enrollment at the class end? Do they want students who are still enrolled? Do they want enrollment at census? because those are all different numbers. And frankly, some of those are a real pain to pull. So this table contains a whole bunch of those already prepared. And they're based off of the add drop dates primarily to use these calculations. So for example, you'll see here, enrolled at census. These will not match institutional analysis census tables for who's enrolled at census. We have a presentation on that actually on Friday. But these are based off of the add drop dates and the census date. So based on add drop dates, if a student is still enrolled at census, then we'll show them as census enrolled here. IA does some cleaning up of records, and that will account for a small difference in using this field to determine enrolled at census versus using official metrics. So always, if you're looking to report official numbers, you'll want to use IA tables for that.
We do have a question. Do you want to wait
Okay.
then with all of these? Okay.
No.
So maybe I missed it. How far does the data go backward? And how new is the data? I'm thinking, for example, it takes 2 days for the Canvas data to flow into Redshift.
Yeah, so it's yesterday's data. The warehouse refreshes nightly. And this goes back, that's a great question. I believe it's at least 2011. I don't believe it goes all the way back to 2009, which I believe was as far back as PS student enroll goes back. So, however, there weren't tons of ASU online students prior to 2011. So for most of our online reporting purposes, that seems to be okay. However, we do get those fringe requests where our dean asks to see enrollment for online students for all time. And that can kind of throw a wrench in how we calculate things. So we'll have to use different tables.
We have a couple more questions and a comment.
Okay.
Comment was, I really appreciate these tips. So thank you, Elizabeth Riley. And Ruben's asking, do you use this session enrollment table for year over year, year-to-date reporting? And he has a second question after that.
So we don't. We use enrollment snapshot tables for year over year and year-to-date reporting. That allows, using dates just isn't ideal for year over year comparisons because things can change. So using snapshots allows us to have a more consistent year over year picture. But it's extremely, the snapshot tables, we have a few in our data mart, and anybody is in the RWUG meetings, you might notice that our EdPlus data mart, I'm not sure what they're called, folders, or we've got a lot of data in those, and primarily it's because we have a few snapshot tables running.
And the last question is this enroll session table set up as a weekly snapshot table for comparing enrollments to this time last year?
So it's not a snapshot table. It runs nightly, and it's just based off of the current data and PS student enroll.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz.
Okay. I will walk through the enrolled at time period. So enrolled at drop by reason. So essentially, if we didn't have this convenience field in this table, we would use the enroll status reason field equals, well, enroll status reason does not equal drop. So students who drop prior to the add drop deadline will have an enroll status reason field of DROP. So any student who does not have a record of DROP in the enroll status reason field is considered enrolled as of the add drop deadline. Another way of doing that, in case you aren't sure, is to use the student enroll status field. And this one's more simple. It's just student enroll status equals E. And that is a super, super simple, quick way of pulling students who are enrolled beyond the add drop deadline. So whenever somebody asks for enrollment, typically the easiest one to pull is just enrolled as of the add drop deadline by just saying student enroll status equals E. Alternatively, you could just use this field, enrolled at add drop by reason equals Y. We also have it calculated by the drop date and the last drop date. But for the most part, I would probably just use the reason field. The enrolled at tuition reimbursement deadline is a really unique feature. This is a more challenging field to pull. And it is based off of dates. So the tuition reimbursement deadline for that particular enrollment pattern varies. So using the drop dates and comparing that against the tuition reimbursement deadline is how we calculate these fields. So it's a really simple way to see how many students are enrolled at the tuition reimbursement deadline. Census is 21st day of the session in summer as well. So this varies from the official university census, which summer census is wonky. If anyone is familiar with summer census, you already know that, but essentially it occurs after the end of summer. For that reason, we use our own census date, which is 21st day of the session, regardless of which session it is. Which again is another reason why for official reporting, this would not be the table to use. Enrolled at class withdrawal date and session withdrawal date. Just the class withdrawal date, so when a student can withdraw from an individual class, is prior to the session withdrawal date, which is when a student would have to withdraw from all of their courses for the session. And enrolled at the end of class, this is essentially, did the student receive a grade in the class? A non-W grade. Another way of pulling that would be the enroll status reason is ENRL. So the student is still currently enrolled. Other values of enroll status reason are cancel, CANC, I believe, which is when a student is essentially kind of administratively dropped because the course is canceled. ENRL, which means the student is still currently enrolled. DROP, so the student dropped prior to the add drop deadline, or withdraw, WDRW. So if the student withdrew after the add drop deadline. The furthest enrollment point and furthest enrollment point by last add drop just returns what the latest stage the student was enrolled at. So if they were enrolled, if they dropped after add drop, or I'm sorry, that's a bad way to put it. So if they were enrolled as of add drop, the furthest enrollment point would say add drop, or perhaps they were enrolled to the class end. So this would say class end. It's just a single field that indicates how far a student made it through the class. Okay, any other questions? Cool.
I don't see any questions now.
Okay, so these are the fields and commonly joined tables. The next piece, I mentioned quickly that I would join pretty commonly to the student profile table, this table here, on using MPL ID and enroll S term. Another table that is hugely useful in session level reporting is our EP term session table, which you just join on the enroll term sets code, and it's just gives descriptive fields to describe the term session code. So it would decode that 2211 AC value into spring A 2021, which is a much nicer user experience. And we have dozens of descriptors and convenience fields within the EP term session table, which I also have another talk on, I believe tomorrow, where I'll run through those fields quickly, just a 10-minute talk. I definitely would recommend, if you are doing session level reporting, checking out the EP term session table. And that's it. Stop sharing.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions? You have a thank you in the chat.
You're welcome.
This was great. Thank you very much. I also put the 3 links. Well, I put the link to the data conference website in the chat for everybody, and the Slack channel ASU data community, and a link to the celebration form. A couple more. This was great. Thank you very much. Great job, Liz. Very helpful. This is super informative. Thank you, Liz. And everybody, don't forget to claim your badges. The links are in the agenda section of the conference website. And the slides to this presentation will be posted on the conference website. So thank you very much. Again, thank you, Liz. That was informative to me. I've never done this before and I loved it. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. Thanks, everyone.